How well does a course syllabus keep up with the latest research, and is it important that it does? A new paper estimates what it calls the education innovation gap, and whether you're a teacher or a student, it also explains why that might matter to you. Hello, Barbara, welcome.
Hi, Tim.
Barbara, first of all, we need to understand what this education innovation gap is. What does it represent?
The education innovation gap measures the distance between the content of higher education courses, which is typically described in the course's syllabus, and the knowledge frontier. We construct this measure as a ratio of similarities, and in particular, as a ratio of the similarity between the content of a course and old knowledge, that is, knowledge that was produced a couple of decades ago, and the same similarity, but with new knowledge that was just produced. So intuitively, the gap will be larger for courses which are more similar or cover more older knowledge relative to newer one.
Now, when you're constructing this gap, does this automatically assume that new knowledge is better than old knowledge, or that absorbing the frontier of knowledge in, I don't know, in physics is better than learning how to do physics?
Well, that's a very good question. In our study, we try to be as agnostic as we can on what is best for whom, because we don't feel like we have the tools to properly answer this question. So our exercise, at least as far as this paper goes, is purely descriptive. So what we do is we describe how the content of higher education courses varies both across and within schools. And we focus specifically on a metric that is related to the coverage of academic frontier knowledge. Of course, there could be differences in the optimal amount of this frontier knowledge. For example, across between undergraduate versus graduate courses. You might think that, for example, we might want to cover more frontier knowledge in graduate level courses. There could also be differences across fields. There's two things which I think are still worth keeping in mind. The first one is that we do find that schools which offer courses with a lower gap on average, which means more frontier knowledge, also have students who are more likely to be themselves involved in research. They go on and they're more likely to get PhDs, they're more likely to produce patents, and they also tend to earn more on average when they enter the labor market. So we have some correlational evidence that low gap is a good thing, but again, it's just correlations. The second thing that I would like to mention is that learning frontier academic knowledge is not necessarily orthogonal or even a substitute to learning skills. And in fact, what we do find is that courses with a lower education innovation gap are also very intensive in what people refer to as soft skills, that are skills that relate to the way that people work with other people, and which have shown to have pretty high returns in the labor market. So academic knowledge and skills are not substitutes. They do not substitute each other.
I'm interested in how you measure this ratio, because I can't imagine it's the easiest thing in the world to measure. First of all, you have to locate where the frontier of knowledge is. How on earth do you do that?
Yeah, so in our analysis, what we take as the frontier of knowledge are recently published academic papers in what we call top journals. These are journals that have a very, very high impact factor, the highest impact factor in each field. This is appealing because presumably that is, the knowledge that is most likely to have an impact in the future. And the fact that we rely on academic journals also implies that we can do this exercise basically for all fields.
And of course, the other part of the ratio is you have to work out what syllabus content is. How can you do that at scale, and how many courses, how many schools could you do that for?
So in our sample, we use a sample of about 2 million, a little bit less than 2 million syllabi, whose text was provided to us by the Open Syllabus Project, which is this research effort that has tried to collect as many syllabi as it is possible across a variety of institutions, not just in the United States, but also across country. For our analysis, we focus on four-year institutions in the United States, and we are We cover about 800 institutions, so we are pretty comprehensive in terms of covering all sorts of institutions. In order to compare frontier knowledge with syllabi, what we do is we calculate measures of text similarity between each syllabus and each academic paper. And in order to do this, we transform each document into a vector of words. We choose words which we think are relevant to capture academic content. Think, for example, about keywords of academic papers. And each element of this word vector is going to correspond to a word, and it's going to represent the frequency of that word in that particular document. So once we have these word vectors for each document, what we can do is we can use them to calculate measures of textual proximity, which is just the proximity between the two vectors. We use the cosine similarity in this paper, but you can think of using others. And then we construct the education innovation gap as just the average cosine similarity of each syllabus with all the papers published many years ago and all the papers published, say, last year. That's essentially what we do.
Everyone watching this now is thinking, I wonder where I am in that gap. So where was the gap the largest? Where was it the smallest? How big is the difference between institutions with a small gap and a big gap?
Yeah, so across schools, the ones that seem to systematically offer courses with the lowest gap, which we think, is analogous to offering students more frontier knowledge, are more selective schools. Think about the Ivy Leagues, for example, or kind of other very selective schools, and also those schools that seem to be spending more on both instruction and research. The gap also seems to be systematically smaller in schools that serve more socioeconomically advantaged students, which is sort of a red flag, if you will, because it signals inequality in access to frontier knowledge across students with different backgrounds. However, we also find differences within schools across courses taught by different people. And in particular, what we find is that the gap seems to be smaller even within schools for courses that are taught by faculty who is more research active, who writes more papers, publishes more papers, gets cited more. And across faculty ranks, interestingly enough, it's the junior faculty, the assistant professors, who seem to be teaching the courses with the lowest gap.
Now, within schools, the published knowledge is free, it's open. Why is there a gap?
So this is another great question, which we don't quite answer in the paper because we don't have the appropriate tools to do that and the appropriate data. But one possible reason, which I personally think could be very important and which I would love to test with the right data, is that in schools that tend to spend more or that can spend more on their instruction, instructors typically teach more and larger courses. So they have less time, fewer resources to update each individual course every single year, which is what you need to do in order to keep a course with a low gap, and also to stay up to date with respect to the knowledge frontier. So this could be a possible explanation for why we see a relationship between the coverage of frontier knowledge and, for example, school resources.
Economists have published a lot of research on the returns to education over the years, and this looks set to add to it. If I am in one of the schools where that gap is large, I'm studying there, why should I worry about that?
So again, as I said before, in this paper, we don't quite go as far as to say that you should worry, because we don't have estimates of the causal returns to an education with a low gap. In the sense, we can't quite pin down the causal relationship between the education innovation gap and student outcomes. The best that we can do with the data that we have are documenting correlations. And as I said, these correlations sort of are consistent with the story, with the word in which exposure to low gap education is better for students. but we don't have the smoking gun there. But we are now working on a follow-up paper where we have information on a smaller set of schools and on the individual students at each school to document precisely those causal links. So hopefully I will have an answer for you soon, but not in this paper.
When you do pin down that, assuming you do pin down that causal relationship, then that gives us the idea that something should be done about it. It's hard to work out what that thing is, though, isn't it? Because generally speaking, as you know, then in academia, then schools set their own syllabi. The teachers have a lot of control over that. So there isn't really a policy that can address this, is it? We just got to convince people one by one.
So I think I touched on this a little bit before, but what I think might be really effective as an incentive is just to give people time and resources. So being an instructor myself, I think time and resources are really key in order to stay up to date with respect to kind of knowing exactly what the knowledge frontier is, having time to read the papers, having time to read working papers, and also having time to do our own research, which is also a way in which people stay up to date with respect to the knowledge frontier. I think this is really the first step in ensuring that frontier knowledge makes it into the courses. Of course, one thing that needs to be acknowledged is that not all institutions have the resources to do this. Not all of them can afford to do this. So we need to be mindful of the possibilities of each school, and also of the implications that this, different possibilities have at the end of the day on the students.
Thank you, Barbara. We'll be looking for that follow-up research. But meanwhile, it's been a pleasure to say the word syllabi, which isn't something that comes up very often in this. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for inviting me.
The paper's called The Education Innovation Gap, and the authors are Barbara Biasi and Song Ma. It's discussion paper 17138 at CEPR, and you can download it using the link that's on screen now. Well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.